All right. So, this week, the portion is looking at Exodus. Well, part of the portion I'm going to concentrate on tonight is looking at Exodus, and I just had a security alert. I just lost my screen. There it is. Exodus 12 through 14. It is the Passover story, the Exodus story. It actually is the complete Exodus story. Once they get across the river, then they're out in the desert, and that begins a whole other story. But the actual leaving and the Exodus, that's what this story is about. And its faith is remembering. And one of the things I came across that really rang a bell with me is that this is a story about destiny, not about history. It's about where the Israelites are going, not where they came from. And everybody can remember, everybody my age or around my age, Charlton Heston was probably the best Moses ever made. He had it down. If you haven't seen that movie, The Ten Commandments, from the 60s, you ought to take a look at it. It's pretty good stuff. My thing isn't working very well. But even though we're starting on, this is about Exodus 12 through 14, everybody did the reading, right? Yep. We really didn't have to, because we just skim over it, because we all know the story, right? It's a big deal, right? Well, I do that too, but this time I got into it a little bit farther, and I found some stuff that I didn't know, and I thought it was pretty interesting. We're going to go back a step to Exodus 4, verses 22 and 23. Who wants to read that for me? Anybody? Go ahead.
Thus you are to say to Pharaoh, thus says Yahweh, my son, my firstborn is Israel. I say to you, send free my son, that he may serve me, but you have refused to send him free. So here I will kill your firstborn.
And under the firstborn, I believe I have, in parentheses there is the word Becher. Is that the proper pronunciation, Matt? Is it Becher? B-E-C-H-O-R, Becher? And that is a unique word because when we look at firstborn, the word firstborn, we look at it more in the line of actually the firstborn person, and there's some inheritance that goes with that in biblical times and everything that they get. But firstborn as a Becher is actually more of a role that you play in the family rather than birthright. I'm going to read this because I won't mess it up. In the early biblical days, there is a Becher in each family. The child serves as an intermediary between the two generations, as he is both the closest to the parents and the siblings. The firstborn is usually the first to be taught the values of the parents. When this child leader imbibes and lives out the parents' values successfully, he takes the noble attributes and breathes life into them, thereby transforming it into a behavior that makes sense in a child's world. This kind of behavior then becomes a real and living possibility for the other children in the family of that generation to emulate. So what we're saying is, if you could look at it the normal firstborn, or as the oldest child, which is normally the person that would come into that fact, because they're older and because they've been around the parents longer, they understand the parents better than maybe a 5 or 6 year old would understand the parents. So they become the intermediary. They're the ones that help guide the younger kids into the value systems of the older parents. In this case here, Israel has been named the firstborn. Now that's the first time in the Torah that any humans have been given that title of God's firstborn. But it's the same thing. It's the Becher. They're to be the intermediary between God and the rest of us. They're to guide us. It doesn't make them any more special than anybody else. Just like your oldest son, you don't love them more than you do the rest of them. But they have a different role. That role doesn't necessarily, as I said, go to just the firstborn. As you can see here, not all Beckers were biologically the firstborn. Here's a list of some of the big characters in the Bible, and that had big roles in the family, and how they came out. Adam, yes, he was the firstborn, obviously, right? Seth, he was not the firstborn. Noah, yes, he was the firstborn. Abraham, no. He had an older brother, Nahor. Isaac, no. He had Ishmael as their older brother. Jacob, no. He had Esau as an older brother. Joseph, no. Reuben was the firstborn in that family. David, no. He had Eliad. And Yeshua, I put yes with an asterisk, only because when biblical in the Bible, when they talk about family structure and they give the list of the families, they always put the oldest one first, which sounds not right. Well, if you look at the family of Joseph, they always put James first. So obviously, unless he came from another family, unless he had a divorce or something like that and brought another kid into it, Jesus is the oldest in the family, but that's just a funny little note that they came out with. So now we look at Exodus 12, 1 through 11, and I call that Israel accepts. I look at when God first called Israel the firstborn. Now Israel is going to accept that challenge, because I know this is contrary to what some believe, but I believe that relationships with God are a two-way street. I believe that grace is not, when they say grace, you can't earn grace. I agree with that. But grace is providing a door for me. Grace is providing a door for me to open. I still have to go through it. So if you look at it back to the family structure, a kid causes a lot of trouble, gets out of line, gets tossed out of the house. Grace, for me, is letting him come back in the house. He still has to follow the same rules. It doesn't change the rules. Grace is not saying you don't have to follow the rules. Grace is saying, to me, it means I'll give you as many chances as you need, but we're still going to stay with the same structure. So Exodus 12, 1 through 11. You got that for me, Rustin? It's a long one.
But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months, and it shall be the first month of the year for you."
Hold up right there. I thought Rosh Hashanah was the new year. Huh. It's pretty amazing, huh? Go ahead.
3. To all the congregation of Israel, that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons, according to what each can eat. You shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. Right? They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted, its head and its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it, with your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover.
Thank you, sir. This is where I say that the theory, I agree with the theory that Israel is accepting a challenge, because it was more of a challenge than we think of when we just read this. There's some debate out there amongst the scholars about whether or not sheep and rams were any kind of a god or an important god for the Egyptians, but there was no debate from Moses. Moses knew this would be a problem for slaughtering a sheep, and so that was the challenge. If you're going to be my children, if you're going to be my firstborn, you got to have some skin in the game. So you got to play along too. So this was the part where once they did this, they were essentially accepting God's challenge. Exodus 8, 21 and 22. Who's got it? Go ahead, Keith. You can read. Come on. Exodus 8, 21 and 22. You know how to read. Come on.
Or else, if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you. Wait. Okay. And your servants and your people, and into your houses, and the houses of the Egyptians.
You're at Exodus 8?
Yeah.
Did I mess up? Okay, I know. Okay, I'm sorry. That one book that only has the 5 books of the Torah with a commentary, it changes the numbers. It's 25 and 26.
Yeah, you have both.
Yeah.
Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, "Go sacrifice to your God within the land." But Moses said, "It would not be right to do so, for the offerings we shall sacrifice to the Lord our God are an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they stone us?"
Right, so Moses was worried that if they did the sacrifices of the sheep to the rams, it would be an abomination to the Egyptians. The Egyptians would stone them. So by slaughtering the lamb before they left and putting the blood along the posts and the lintels, they were putting themselves in danger. They were going in direct defiance of the Egyptians. So that's why the theory is that this was them doing their part to in the agreement between them and God. It was sort of like a conditional covenant. It's not listed as one of the covenants, but I see it that way, as a conditional covenant, just like the whole Mosaic covenant was. It was conditional. It wasn't automatic. You weren't automatically going to get God's grace in this. The Israelites have to fulfill. They have to follow the Torah and the instructions of God in order to complete the covenant. Now, this started it all out in my eyes. This is where they agreed to. So now we're looking at a new beginning. Might get in trouble here, but yeah, God tried with Adam and Eve. Didn't work out too well. So then he wiped everything out and got with Noah, right? That didn't work out too well. So now here's a third chance of a new beginning and a new way to get this thing started. And I think is that the idea of a Becker, of somebody to guide the rest of the world and to put out the message was a great idea. Yogiism, you guys don't even know who Yogi Berra is, most of you, but it's deja vu all over again. And with this, I'm just showing you the parallels. There's so many parallels between what's happening during the crossing of of the Red Sea, and with the beginning of time, the beginning of creation in Genesis. In Genesis 1, the Spirit of God, Matt, how do you say that? Ruh. It means spirit, wind, or breath, was hovering over the waters. In Exodus 14:21, the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind, which is also ruah, right? In Genesis 1:4, it was separating the lightness from the darkness. In Exodus 14:20, throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to one side and light to the other side, again, separating the light from the darkness. In Genesis 1:6, let the expanse separate from water from water. Exodus 14:22, the Israelites went through the sea on the dry ground with a wall of water on the right and on the left. Genesis 1:9, let the water under the sky be gathered in one place, and let dry land, there's no way I'm pronouncing that word, appear. And in Exodus 14:22, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry land. And you might not think them saying dry land seems like a big deal. I mean, that's an easy parallel, right? But there's a little difference. That's why I put that other word up there. Because that word is only used 3 times in the Torah. And that first time is in Genesis, that particle there. And the second time is actually when Moses was at the burning bush. And then this is the third time, so this is the only time that word's used. The rabbis believe so much in this theory of the parallel that they take one more step with it. And they say that when the Red Sea was parted and the walls of the water were on each side, there was actually trees of fruit and vegetation along those walls, which would go along with the next step in Genesis where he grew the vegetation, right? So, interesting stuff. Assimilation. During the times of the Torah, there was no requirement. Before organized religion, there was no requirement of going in front of 3 rabbis to become a Jew or any of this. It was Israel and Israelites. It was a nation, and it was a nation that, to become part of that nation, all you had to do was to join it, to come in and assimilate, start doing the things that they do, following the Torah, and you became an Israelite. I was talking to Matt earlier. We talk often here about how hard the assimilation has been for in St. Bernard Parish. That he talks often about how he's not been accepted after all these years and everything else. And it hit me when I was looking at this is that that's not St. Bernard Parish's fault. That's Matt's fault. If he wants to assimilate, he has to start doing everything the way they do it, right? Yeah, you got to eat crawfish. You got to think that Rocky's is a 5-star restaurant. Yes. Yeah, there's some requirements to go along with this, right? So assimilation is important, and there's some verses that back this up a little bit here. Exodus 12, 48 and 49, as it goes through, it says, then they may take part like one born in the land. No uncircumcised male may eat of it. The law applies to the native born and to the alien living among you. That's talking about Passover, the Passover meal, right? But it says the law applies to native born and alien living among you. So if you were willing to circumcise all the males in your family and follow the rules, then you were considered like one of the native born. In Ezekiel 47:22, goes even a little bit farther. It says, you are to allot it as an inheritance for yourselves and for the aliens who settled among you and who have children. You are to consider them native-born Israelites. Along with you, they are allotted inheritance among the tribes of Israel. This is when they divided up the land. And the aliens were given a portion. And then, of course, the one everybody's more familiar with is the olive tree in Romans. where we become a branch on the olive tree, right? So, with this being said, what is the mission of Israelites, right? Israelites were to be, by being a Becker, they were to be the guide for all nations. To become, at that time, they were worried about them becoming monotheist. I still got, besides being old, I got a little bit of COVID brain still going on here. I keep forgetting things, but so Israel, in Isaiah 49, he says, "It's too small a thing for you to be my servant and to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept. I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that you may bring my salvation to the ends of the earth." That was their job. Their job was to be an example, to be a light. And in Matthew 5:14 and through 16, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do you light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand and gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." So the instructions are pretty clear. And you want to play it? Go ahead, play it. This is.
I'm not religious. So.
He's talking to
I
God.
want to be believers. And I sure as heck don't believe this.
That's why I showed up. Too many non-believers.
But I read in an article that religion is on the upswing.
Religion is easy. I'm talking about faith. You're going to help me change that.
Me? I don't belong to any church.
Neither do.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a. He says, "Neither do I," and he goes on, right? So, but that's what I wanted to talk about tonight. That prior to organized religion, there was no requirements. You didn't have to go and get approved by 3 rabbis to become an Israelite. There's a difference between being an Israelite and being Jewish, I think. It's at least being part of Judaism, as far as I can tell, because Judaism didn't come along till way after this. And I personally believe, well, I question a lot of things that are written down in the text often. I do believe in the Torah, and I believe that this was the guidance. This is the guidance on how to live our lives, and it was a guidance for everybody. It wasn't just for people that were born in Israel. It was for everybody. We all have an opportunity to follow the Torah without going through any ceremonies, without doing anything else. It's not saying that any religions are bad. I don't personally know. I mean, who am I? I'm not God. I can't tell you whether, giving the cross in front of Mother Mary is going to send you to hell or not. I don't know any of that stuff. That's between them and God. But as far as I'm concerned, anything that brings you to God can't be that bad. But none of that is required as far as God is concerned. He said he doesn't have a religion either. He doesn't go to church neither. He doesn't do any of that stuff, because it's about the heart. It's not about a building. It's not about doctrine. It's not about any of that. It's about the heart, and whether our heart is for God and whether we want to follow God in our everyday activities. And deeds are important. I mean, you saw that in one verse. Deeds are important. Deeds show the rest of the world. It's not a checklist. Deeds are not a checklist, okay? You don't have to do certain things to go to heaven and all that stuff. But deeds are important if you're going to be the light. If we're acting in a way that honors God, people will see that. And if we're not acting in a way that honors God, they definitely see that. And especially if you have kids, right? Kids will pick out everything you do wrong and copy it, and stuff that you do right, you got to beat into their heads, right? So, but that's our responsibilities, and that's what I got from this teaching, from my studies this week, that it's pretty cool because I'm not a Jew. I don't want to be a Jew. But now I can be part of God's firstborn. I can go into that. I can be part of that. And that's what I desire to be. I got a lot of work to do, but that's the goal. That's the goal that I have for this. Other than that, anybody got any questions?
Yeah, what's up with the instructions for Passover when it says you, verse 5, you may take it from the sheep or from the goats? And I thought you would explain that because you've talked about the verse in the New Testament at Camp Hope, sheep and goats. Or you have the question up on the board, don't you?
Right. Well, that goes into what is it? Matthew 20. 25. Yeah. That and you're right because in Matthew 25 Jesus talks about separating the sheep from the goats. I wish I would have thought about that.
You skipped over that?
I didn't skip over it. I read it, but I didn't put the two together.
I'm sure you're going to hate the goats.
I didn't put the two together. That in one section they make that a difference. I thought the importance. What I picked out from the importance of the sheep and the goats was this. It was another way of putting mud in the Egyptians' eyes, because if anything was a god, or pictures of gods in Egypt, it was the ram, right? So that would have been one of the goats, but I don't know. Yes, sir.
This fucking means nothing, but I know you're talking about the unleavened bread, and they talk about bitter.
Bitter herbs.
Right. I always hear about these bitter herbs. Is there and this may be a question for another time. Does that mean anything? Like why do they seem to be bitter?
You're asking why God put that in the rules. I don't know. Do you know that, Matt?
Yeah, we talk about it at Passover. It's one of the things that you dip in there and you
Right.
eat it.
Yeah.
We probably don't make it bitter enough, but it's supposed to be so bitter that when you bite into it, you cry, so that you remember like the tears that people went through as they were in Egypt and the pain that they went through. And so there's all of the elements on the Passover Seder tray all have to do with the experiences of Israel in Egypt, so that as the title of this, Faith is Remembering, so that you remember like you were there, like you were actually there, so you can actually experience the event yourself. That's the point of all of the elements on the plate.
And one of the other things I remember now that I didn't mention was when we look back to this being about destiny and not about history. If you remember at the Seder dinner, the last thing we do at the Seder dinner is say, next year in Jerusalem, right? It's about the future. It's not about the past. I wondered, and I dug, and I couldn't get anything. I couldn't find anybody else that was asking the same question. That's how I find my answers, right? Find other people that are asking the same questions. I wondered two things. One is on the unleavened bread. This was obviously. It's in the Exodus requirements, and it's in there's about 3 places where it talks about the Passover, right? And the only place is in Deuteronomy that it says about it being about haste, which is where we get the idea that they were in such a rush to get out that they didn't have time for the bread to rise, right? And I wonder, well, they must have had risen bread still. I mean, they still made bread 3 or 4 days earlier, right? Why couldn't they have that bread? And the Exodus version doesn't say anything about that. It says that they're going to eat unleavened bread, but it doesn't give you any reason. And unless you're looking forward, how would you know they were going to be rushed out of there and not be able to eat their bread? So that question always popped in my head. And same thing like the bitter herbs. I mean, did they? I guess God was looking forward, saying that we were going to. We would need to do this in ceremonies in the future, right? we going to have lamb this year? I know. Me and that old text just keeps getting in the way.
This is versus the text. We'll discuss that later.
Will we? Because it's kind of opening a can of worms. Like that question and.
Well, yeah,
The tradition says that you don't eat the lamb because you're supposed to sacrifice the lamb in the temple, but they didn't clearly. So the tradition goes, against the text a little bit.
and that's only half of Judaism believes that. The other half has lambs. So yeah, and you're supposed to. The other portion of was it? You read that it says that you have to roast it in the fire. You can't boil it or do anything else. And the theory is that when you this was about God and Israel becoming one, right? And because if you boil a lamb or eat it raw, it falls apart. Where when you roast it, it becomes one. It's solid. So. I can't help you. I'm just telling you what to say.
Yeah, this is.
Can't let it fall apart.
Where's the handlebars? Where?
How do we apply this?
How do we apply this? That's the question.
How do we apply? Well, it's simple. The whole story is about a new beginning. Okay, it's about God creating an environment that we can all be a part of. Starting out with the Israelites as the firstborn, as the Becker, as to be our guide, and anybody can become an Israelite. You just have to assimilate.
Yeah, and your explanation of that word, I don't know, as many times as we've looked at the firstborn and the second getting the blessing and all that, I don't think I've ever remember someone explaining that word. So that was great because and showing the list, how many of them that we've heard about,